Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and children love superheroes. And there are definitely a lot of superheroes out. However, I think it's time to create a new superhero. And let's call him Captain Tooth. After all children need to lose their teeth at some point, and sometimes it's very frightening, and sometimes it's very fun. So let's make a Captain Tooth superhero cape. I found this great fabric from Timeless Treasures, and it's definitely tooth related. So this is the fabric I'm going to use for the cape, but you can use any fabric you want. We need to make Captain Tooth, so let's choose a nice bright white, and for his cape, let's do a superhero red cape. Now Captain Tooth is just going to be fused on the cape, so it's going to be really easy. We have Captain Tooth and we have his superhero cape. And I'll put a link in the description so you can print these out. I'm going to be using a heat and bond to put Captain Tooth on the cape. And I'm going to use these pages that are already the size of the pages I need, which is very convenient. Heat and bond is a fusible web. So what it is glue that's stuck onto paper. And you can see that shiny part is the glue. And that paper side will come off after. So I've traced out his cape and him, and I've done it on the paper side. Once the picture is put on your fusible paper, you're going to be able to fuse it onto the cape and fuse them onto your fabric. Let's start with the cape. The first thing I need to do is press my fabric, and then I can roughly cut out the shape because I don't need all of that extra fused onto the fabric. This cape is going to fit underneath Captain Tooth, so we're going to have an area here that can be trimmed off after. So I'm going to press this fabric and bring this to the iron and press it onto the back, so that shiny piece is going onto the back of the fabric, and I can play with the placement. All fusible webs take irons at different temperatures. Some take steam, some do not have steam. So follow the directions of the heat and bond or the fusible web that you have. Now I can cut out the shape that I want. I could also do these in two different pieces, but I'm just going to leave them in one. I'm just going to cut along those lines and leaving this little extra here to go under Captain Tooth. So this is what it's going to look like from the front side. And I still have that paper along the back. When I put this on the cape, I'm going to do a zigzag stitch all the way around. So I'm going to add a zigzag stitch along this area just so that you can see a difference. So I'm going to transfer the markings to the other side. So I have the shape there, so when I do that outline stitch, I'll know where to go. I need to do the same thing with Captain Tooth, and I'm going to press my white fabric and fuse him on the back of the white fabric. I'm also going to outline him with a zigzag stitch. And that same zigzag stitch, I'm going to follow all of the other lines. And that way I don't have to do any applique, because after all, he is white. So the first thing I'm going to do is transfer my markings. I have all of his facial features done. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this black Sharpie marker, and you can use a fabric marker or a Sharpie. I wouldn't use a Sharpie if I was making an heirloom, but this is a fun project. So if you have a Sharpie, it's going to work out fine. And I'm going to trace all of the outside shape before I cut it. The black is just going to help fill in any of the little spots as I'm doing the zigzag stitch. And I'm going to be using black in my top and bottom thread so that I can really outline him well. But having that little black line is just going to fill in a little of those holes as you're zigzagging. Once he's all outlined, I'm going to color his eyes in. And that way I don't have to applique them or embroider them. I'm just going to color in the eyes with the Sharpie. And that's a really easy way of doing an applique. I can now cut him out, and I'm going to go on the outside of my drawn line. And then he will be ready to go. We're going to work with 1 yard of fabric. So the fabric is about 45 inches from selvage to selvage. We're going to cut a piece of this selvage all the way down the edge. Just be easier if you refold your fabric so the selvages are touching. We need to cut an 8-inch strip. This 8-inch piece is going to be the tie around the neck and a little pocket for a tooth. On one end, cut a 4-inch strip. This little 4-inch strip by 8 inches, we're going to make a little pocket or a little pouch for the tooth. So we can trim off this seam allowance, and then on that one end, we're going to fold the fabric once and twice. Just stitch that little edge down. We want to repeat this folded edge onto the second side. To make this little pocket or this little bag, it's going to be really easy. It's only 2 lines of stitching. Fold one edge over about an inch. The next side, move up and have it cover that first seam. Now along each edge, you just need to finish it off. Turn it right side out. We now have a superhero hiding pouch that we can put that tooth in and put it under the pillow. With the rest of this big piece at 8 inches, we're going to cut off that selvage and cut this piece in half down the center. Take those long strips and sew them together. Now take this long piece and fold it in half so right sides are touching, and stitch a 1/4 inch all the way down. So you're going to make a big long tube. Then we're going to be able to take that tube and turn it right side out and press. This is a very long strip, but it's going to give you the chance to cut it down to the size that you want. We have one big piece of fabric left over. We need to take this, put a little rolled hem all the way around the 4 sides. Once those edges are done all the way around, I have somewhat of a 34-inch square. It's not exact, and we don't need it exact. We're going to turn this piece into the cape. So you're going to take one side and fold it down 3 inches. We now need to do 2 long rows of stitching. One row is going to be stitching this edge down. The next is 1 inch from that top. With those 2 rows of stitching done, what it's given us is 2 areas of casings. We're going to use the second one to put this long strap in. But before we put the tie in, we need to put Captain Tooth on the cape. Now you can decide where Captain Tooth is going to go. You can put him right in the center or bring him up a little bit so it would be more on the back. From here, I can decide how his super cape is going to go. So I'm going to take the paper off the back of this cape, and I'm going to put that cape into the position that I want. If the cape is very red, it is going to show through on Captain Tooth, and I don't want to see the cape through him. So in order for that to happen, I need to trim off a little bit of this cape. I'm going to take that back paper off the tooth. Then I'm going to put Captain Tooth in the position that I want. Once I have the position that I want, I can trace the outside of Captain Tooth. Now I can lift him up and cut out what would be underneath. Now that I have that exact position, I'm going to be able to fit it together like a puzzle and fuse both of these pieces down. Most of the heat and bonds are permanent, so if you want, you could just leave it at this point. But I do want to do a nice zigzag all the way around. And I'm going to also follow over all the face features. Where the 2 fabrics have gone together, I'm going to treat them both separately so they're both going to have their own zigzag. So for this, I'm going to use my foot 23 on my Bernina, and I've pulled up both of my threads. I'm going to do a zigzag that fits within that little window. On my machine, it is a 4 for that width, and it's going to be a 0.5. So I'm just going to start stitching, and I'm going to stitch over top of these threads just for a couple of stitches, then I can trim them off. And that's just going to anchor and cover those threads, so I will have no threads being seen. So now I'll pull the threads out of the way. I can trim those later, and I'm going to stitch all the way around. Let the machine do all the work and just guide it under the foot. You can use any foot you want that has a nice big opening so you can get that zig and zag. That nice tight satin stitch really outlines him well. And if you look from behind, you can see a ghost of him, but it still looks nice. We now can put this long tie through that casing. And I do like to use the bottom one so that the top one stays as a ruffled collar. So with that long tie in there, we can adjust it how we want. You can just gather this up so as it goes around the neck, you have this little collar up at the top. And here's the part that you can adjust it, depending on the size you want. You can put a couple of stitches just to hold that in, and then trim the edges to the length that you want. If you want it just to come around and have a little snap, then you can cut these shorter and just put a little rolled hem to finish them off if you want to just add a snap or a piece of Velcro. If you want to tie it, you're going to need that extra length. The ties can be designed personally on how you would like them and how you feel more comfortable having them. If you leave it long, you can always store it flat and just gather that up when you need it. If the cape is too long, you can always put up a nice big hem and just hand stitch that so as your child grows or someone else is going to use it, you can have that hem come out and have a longer superhero cape. And don't forget, Captain Tooth also has a little secret super pouch for the tooth. So we now have created a new superhero, Captain Tooth. And if you ask me, looks a little cheeky. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.